this is my review of Incredibles 2. Hey guys, Zack here, and this is my review of Incredibles 2. So if you haven't seen Incredibles 2 yet, I would recommend clicking off because there will be spoilers in this video. Also, I recommend watching the first one if you haven't, because the first one's amazing. The second one is just as good, and I definitely recommend watching both because they're both very good films. The first one is recommended as one of the greatest superhero films of all time, and is a personal favorite of a lot of people, which is why Incredibles 2 blew up so much. But without further ado, let's get started with it. So the movie starts off where the first one left off, with the Underminer emerging and threatening to declare war on peace and happiness, and the Incredibles step up to stop him. And they are successful in doing so. However, the Underminer does in fact get away, successfully robs a bank and runs away with the money in a little smaller excavator, while the big excavator is running uncontrollably toward Town Hall, causing a bunch of property damage along the way, and the Incredibles are forced to stop it. So they do in fact stop it with the help of Frozone, but are still arrested anyway because destruction of property, and also supers are illegal because they still haven't fixed the whole rule of that with the politicians and all that, which is the entire plot of this movie, by the way. They do end up fixing that by the end, but for the time being, supers are in fact illegal. But after being arrested, Violet confesses that that her crush, Toby Ridinger, I believe his name was, actually saw her without her mask on, and Mr. Incredible actually puts in a request with Rick Dicker, head of the NSA, which I believe stands for National Super Agency, something like that. I don't know, there's not an article on what they do exactly. All I know is that they help supers when they need to be relocated, or somebody needs to be, I don't know, have their memory wiped or something like that. But typically when the super's involved, they're the guy to go to. And as Mr. Incredible, Bob, after Bob talks to Rick about this, Rick decides to bring up that he's and the entire agency have been kaput because it cost way too much, as he stated in the first film. As every time a super gets in trouble, they have to fix everything, and it costs more and more money each time. And it was mainly Bob's fault, but more on that later. Not really. But upon hearing that, Bob is sad, and Rick reveals that he can only pay for 2 more weeks in the hotel that they're staying in, because their house has been destroyed in the last film. But Rick does say that he will look into Toby Ridinger and his memory, which we actually see in the first 5 minutes or so of the film, of him getting his memory wiped and all that. But this does have consequences later, which I will explain. And shortly after the fight, Lucius Frozone, he shows up and talks to Helen and Bob about a guy that he met on his way away from the fight, about how there's a guy who wants to help him make supers legal again, and that he's going over there now, and then he shows them his super suit and says that they should get dressed and head over too. So they leave incognito without all the kids and all that, and the kids are suspicious of it because they are kind of upset about the whole supers being illegal thing, as they stated at dinner. But they do head over to see the guy in their old suits, not the new ones, because the guy is pretty nostalgic. And then the guy, Winston Dever, I believe his name was, yeah, Winston Dever, he says that he loves superheroes and that he's willing to change the public opinion by showing the perspective of the supers themselves, because he said, as he states, if they let the politicians and all that do what they want, then they're going to think Well, as you can see here, there was a lot of property damage, and the supers are responsible. So we're gonna blame the supers, but that's not actually what happened. The supers were trying to stop it and got blamed for it because a guy sued everybody and all that, and that's why supers are illegal. But the thing about this is that he does point out that they are going to be integrating cameras into their super suits so that he can show the world their perspective, something that his sister, who showed up late, actually invented. And during this scene, he also reveals that he inherited the company, DevTech, because the company's previous owner, his dad, actually died as an indirect result of the supers being forced underground, as he tried to call the supers and nobody came to help because they were all underground. They weren't allowed to be supers anymore, and he died because he got killed by robbers who had broken into the house that night. And that's kind of sad, and I feel really bad for the two kids. Well, the one less so, because reasons I will explain later. But yeah, they eventually decide to go with Helen, Elastigirl, because she has the least amount of damage under her record. Her record is very not, I guess the word would be, her record is cleaner than the others. She hasn't broken as much stuff. So they decide to go with her because she's the safest option as insurance. And she and Bob talk it over the next night, that night, and Bob decides to become a stay-at-home dad. And from here, the film actually diverges into two separate plot lines that reconverge toward the end of this. So on Helen's side of things, she is given a new bike that's like the one she used to use back when she was a super in her prime, but doesn't have it anymore. I don't know what happened to that. And goes to, I forget what the name of the town the city is, but she goes there and stakes out some stuff because she heard that there was going to be an issue involving a train, which does happen because during the grand unveiling, the train actually starts moving in the right direction, then pulls away from the station backwards, and Elastigirl has to chase after it, and she eventually does chase after it and stop the train from crashing and falling off the track, because the track wasn't completely built. It was just designed to showcase and go from one station to the next, but because there wasn't any track the other direction, because they weren't planning to go that direction, there was no track. So she goes, stops the train, and slaps the conductor a couple times because he was kind of the problem, because she knocked on the window and he didn't answer. So she came in and started harassing him and telling him what happened and if he had a good excuse. He just looks at her with a blank expression and doesn't say anything and is completely confused as to what happened and has no idea what went wrong. And then she looks over at the screen and sees a message that says, "Welcome back, Elastigirl. Love, Screenslaver." So that's her entire story arc, is that during the film, she's trying to catch this guy Screenslaver, who throughout his run tries to derail a train and kill a visiting ambassador for superheroes to make superheroes legal again by hijacking her helicopters, which Elastigirl realizes as the news host she is talking to during her interview reveals, and Screenslaver reveals this through the anchor, and she goes in, shuts down the monitors on board, because that's how Screenslaver's powers work. He hypnotizes people using screen displays and shuts down the entire she also shuts down the news crew in the process, so that they're broken from the controls of Screenslaver, and goes on board a helicopter to stop them, and saves the ambassador in the process. And then she finally comes to Winston's brother Evelyn, who is trying to help with the whole super thing. She brings in a bunch of supers and also tries to confide in Elastigirl that her technology isn't really directed because she has to do the whole marketing thing with her brother. And then Elastigirl decides to enlist her help and asks for a scanner, a police scanner of some sort kind of thing, a signal tracker display thing that will lock onto a signal that she can use to find Screenslaver, which she is successful with by using a remote interview to track him, and then comes into his apartment where she finds that Screenslaver is obsessed with hypnosis and screens and all that, and is eventually ambushed by Screenslaver herself, and gives up a pretty good fight, but in the end decides he can't win, runs away, and sets the building to self-destruct, which she is unable to prevent because she's chasing after Screenslaver and she can't let him get away. And his apartment does blow up and she loses all her evidence, and the guy she catches is also kind of confused. He has no idea how he got there or what happened, but she has him arrested anyway, and pay attention to that because that is important later. Meanwhile, Bob is trying his own hand at a stay-at-home dad thing by trying to run the house that was given to them by Winston, and he is trying. He's trying his hardest, but he's trying to fix a problem with Violet because he accidentally got his entire memory of Violet erased rather than the memory of her being a super, which is kind of a big deal, so he's trying to fix that. And also he's trying to help Dash with his math, and he's trying to watch Jack, whose powers have started to emerge in the past couple days, as seen in the Syndrome fight at the end of the first movie, and is trying to monitor him, but eventually gets very, very tired and very, very cranky. And it all comes to a head when he finds out that his old super car, the Incredibile, is being sold at an auction, and he just loses it right then and there, and decides after consulting Lucius that the best thing to do would be to give Jack to Edna for a couple days. And at first she's reluctant because she's a designer and she's very busy. She designs super suits for superheroes. She's very busy. She has a very busy schedule. She's not entirely sure if she has the time to do it, but after seeing Jack's emergence of powers and how many he has, she decides to take him under her wing and decides to build a child-proofing costume of sorts to keep Jack from overusing his powers, to keep him kind of balanced so that he doesn't go overboard and that he doesn't burn the house down in the process. And she is successful, and after Bob gets some sleep, he finally does become a better dad in this. And this does result in a bit of a calming moment, and everybody realizes that their dad is just trying to help and all that, and that he's trying to do his best, but he's not perfect. And they decide, and Bob then goes back to get Jack and learns about the new suit and the little tracker that she made, which is designed to basically baby-proof Jack from himself so that his powers don't go haywire. And then Bob is excited about the new suit, and while he's pensive at first because he believes that he's not entirely sure if it's safe for the suit and Jack to be in a demonstration, but after seeing the suit in action decides, what could possibly go wrong here? And does bring the baby home. And then this is where the two plots diverge at this point. So at this point, the two plots do diverge. Elastigirl is at a gala thing with Winston Dever and Evelyn Dever and all the supers that have been brought over that were in hiding but aren't now, including some such as Void, who has portal powers, and Reflux, who can spit fire, lava, whatever it's called. And there's also Crushhauer, who has telekinetic abilities and has the ability to crush things, which is about what his extent can do, as he points out later in the film. And a couple other superheroes who are all going to be part of the main plot later. But during the thing, during the gala or whatever, Elastigirl realizes that something didn't quite seem right, and goes to review the tapes from her body cam, while Evelyn joins her, and she tries to deduce exactly what happened during the fight, as she notices that Screenslaver had a monitor in his apartment, something that is very strange considering how Screenslaver's powers work. She does go to investigate this and starts playing it back and sees a green glow in his goggles, and after reaching into the mask realizes that Screenslaver was being remotely controlled by somebody because there were little screens in his glasses. But before she can even tell anybody, she is suppressed by Evelyn, who reveals herself to be the real Screenslaver, and that the Screenslaver she was hypnotizing actually was a pizza delivery guy that she just kind of abducted and repurposed for her own ends, which is to basically keep supers illegal forever, because she blames the supers for what happened to her dad, because nobody came to help, which wasn't their fault. As I said, they were all forced underground, and she believes that supers had made people weak, and she reveals all this to Elastigirl, who is in a freezer in a basement of the ship that they're on, which is revealed to, and it's revealed that her weakness is freezing temperatures, because any freezing temperatures can cause her to break if she stretches too much, which seems like a bit of a problematic power if she fights anybody in the cold, which is probably why she has Bob. But well, I mean, they are also in love with each other, but more or less she has Bob to help out with her shortcomings involving the cold, because Bob has no such weakness. And then the kids are also part of the superhero team. But she also reveals that she's also going to do it by hypnotizing supers, something that she does succeed in. And then she calls Bob and tells him that she had an encounter with Screenslaver and was acting strange, and that he needed to come over right away. So he puts on his new suit, he puts on the super suit, and goes off and does his thing. Meanwhile, the hypnotized supers, Reflux, Void, and all of them, those guys have been hypnotized. Brick and everybody, they've been hypnotized with the hypno goggles and are sent to hypnotize the kids. But Frozone, who had been called prior, shows up at just the right time and succeeds in helping the kids fight off the supers. Meanwhile, Dash has called the Incredibile to their house, and Frozone, just before being forced into hypnosis, gives the Incredibile orders for voice recognition, and both Violet and Dash give their voice recognition into the Incredibile and take off as Frozone is being suppressed. As Frozone is a cool dude, pun intended, that's literally his power. He can freeze things, just not in high temperature situations. But he is no match for 7 supers at once. So he is forced to let the kids escape before he's hypnotized, and then tries to chase after them after being hypnotized, but is unsuccessful in capturing them, thankfully. And meanwhile, Bob has arrived at the location and is tricked by a hypnotized Elastigirl and forced into submission with another pair of goggles. And with the 3 ambassadors, I guess, under her rule with the supers, she then puts her next phase of her plan into motion, unaware that the kids are on their way. And she has no counter for Jack, which is an important part in the film, because they get on the boat as her plan is going into motion with making the supers look like villains, and that it's a survival of the fittest thing. But that's not the case, as they all have been hypnotized, as I said. And after evading the supers a couple times and a close call with Violet and Void, they do successfully find Mr. Incredible, Frozone, and Elastigirl, and Jack just kind of floats over to his mom, realizes that mommy isn't acting right, and because Jack is smart even for a young age, Jack's a toddler. Jack is like a baby. Which is why he's so unstable, because he's a baby and his powers are tied to his emotions. But he realizes that his mom isn't acting right, realizes it's the glasses because he's smart even for a child, for a small baby, and removes the goggles, and with the assistance of Violet and Dash, the four of them manage to free all the other supers, except for Crushhour, who does successfully destroy the pathway to the engine room, and at this point they are trying to stop the ship, as they have rigged it, as Evelyn has rigged the entire ship to crash into the city and cause a lot of casualties, while also hypnotizing all the ambassadors and heroes not under her control, so that nobody could reveal what actually happened. And they do successfully stop the ship. Frozone and Mr. Incredible team up, and Frozone destroys one of the hydrofoils on the side of the boat, and Mr. Incredible turns the rudder, which causes the entire ship to rotate 180 degrees away from the city, which is a good thing. But Evelyn does try to escape in a helicopter, I guess plane type thing that's built into the ship, and tries to take her brother with her, but it's actually because of her brother realizing that she's a bad person that he tries to stop, that he actually jumps off the plane onto the boat, and actually does succeed in freeing all the hypnotized people, which is a good thing. But there's still the matter of the boat at that time. And meanwhile, Elastigirl chases after her with the help of Void and catches up to her, but Evelyn is tries to kill Elastigirl using asphyxiation on the plane, which is a pretty dangerous thing, because death by suffocation is kind of dangerous. I mean, which is why she is one of my favorite villains. But it is kind of dangerous, and Elastigirl is just barely conscious and flopping around, and barely able to stand and all that. And she's a bit of a pushover at this point. But Elastigirl does at the last minute take a flare gun, blast open the window, and which sends Evelyn flying out, and then crashes the plane in the water before jumping out of the plane, catching Evelyn and being transported back onto the ship by Void. And then all the supers reconcile, and everybody realizes what had happened, and Evelyn is arrested, and the pizza guy is presumably let go, but it's never actually stated what happened to him. They probably let him go once they realized he legitimately didn't know anything, and that he was kind of duped a little bit. But it was but considering that he was the prime suspect, it was probably unlikely until Evelyn was eventually arrested. But after that, everybody is pretty much happy. They all go home. They finally re-legalize supers, and then Violet decides that maybe she should try to branch out to Tony a little bit more, and goes to it, and then she goes to him, and then she basically reintroduces herself and asks him out on another date, which he humbly accepts, because Tony's a good dude. He's a popular dude in universe, but he's a cool dude, which is why he's so popular. Everybody likes him because he's so approachable. I wish people would think that way about me, because I'm an approachable dude, but people don't come to me for advice. But I digress. And then the movie actually kind of ends with another cliffhanger about the supers going to fight some guys, some bank robbers who were basically toting guns around and shooting in the streets, which is kind of dangerous. They were just driving down the street in a car, and which Violet reluctantly has to go do, and she does have to leave Tony alone at the movie theater for a little bit, and at first she is kind of mortified about the fact that her entire family's there with her. So But yeah, it does end on kind of a positive note. And there are talks of an Incredibles 3, which I am looking forward to, because the director actually stated that there were a lot of plot lines in the movie that didn't wind up happening, and that they may have enough for a third movie, which I'm hoping is the case. But yeah, I did enjoy the film. I liked it. It was a fun little movie. It was a great sequel, for a much needed sequel, might I add, for a film franchise that a lot of people liked. But yeah, it was a good film. I liked it. It was fun. And I did like Screenslaver as a villain. I mean, Evelyn wasn't actually the Screenslaver, but she was controlling the guy who was wearing the Screenslaver costume, and then revealed herself to be the true main villain. So I'm going to be calling her Screenslaver, like it or not, because Screenslaver was my favorite villain, bar none, because her entire philosophy is that, oh, supers kill my dad because they didn't want to help. No, and then I'm like, no. And then I kind of agreed with Winston a bit that the supers didn't help because they were forced underground and weren't allowed to, which is a pretty good counter argument. But I see where Evelyn is coming from. It's kind of like she blames the supers for the death of her dad because she thinks that supers were directly responsible, even though her dad dying was just a bit of unfortunate circumstances, and that it just kind of happened at the wrong time. But it was unfortunate with the whole thing about Screenslaver, because she wanted vengeance for what happened to her dad, and she was blaming supers because in her mind the whole thing about supers was that her whole vendetta with supers was basically fueled by the fact that her dad had died calling the supers, but because they had been forced underground, nobody answered, and because nobody answered, he died to some robbers who had shot him. Which means that in her mind, supers were directly responsible, even though they weren't, and that she should get all supers illegalized forever to get vengeance for her dad, which isn't the case. But because it's not the case of, Screenslaver was like, yeah, this is what happened to my dad, so I'm going to try and rationalize it a little bit. And I get it, a loss is hard, but blaming somebody else, especially people with superpowers who could mess you up if you got on their bad side, as was demonstrated in the first movie, could cause that could cause a problem for people. I get that supers in this world are the minority. They're like, I don't know, they're like, I'm fighting to find an example that isn't racist, but they're like, I don't know, they're like ethnic groups that like immigrate to somewhere else, I guess. That's the vaguest I can go without offending any one particular group of people. But it is kind of like that. Supers are the minority in this world. They are a small group of individuals who are discriminated against a little bit, which I guess is what caused so many people to have appeal to them. Because while yes, people were accepting of them, there is the whole thing about how supers are illegal because Mr. Incredible saved a guy who didn't want to be saved, and he sued the government about it, which is the whole entire plot point of the series. And then supers were made illegal again, which is good. But I get where she's coming from. I just don't agree with what her message was. She shouldn't have tried to eradicate supers simply because she was grieving and didn't know how to handle that grief, so she lashed out in anger at the supers. But it's not entirely their fault, as supers by their nature help people. They are inclined to help, and they decide to use their powers to be superheroes instead of supervillains and actually save people, which is something that she conflicted with because she felt that the heroes were making people weak, hence why her dad died. But her dad had died trying to contact the supers that had all gone underground, not because the dad was relying on supers. He just called the supers, and circumstances just kind of aligned in a way that he wasn't able to contact anybody and died. It wasn't the supers' fault. She can't blames a minority because they refused to help in her time of need, in her dad's time of need, and that was a problem for her. But I agree with the fact that yes, her dad died, and it was indirectly the Super's fault because they weren't able to help because they weren't allowed to. But she took it a bit too far by basically abducting a dude who nobody apparently knew was missing. Apparently, I don't know how they didn't notice that. I don't know how the pizza company he works for noticed that he didn't show up for work in about a week. But yeah, it was interesting. It was interesting though, because her entire philosophy was, oh, supers are bad because they didn't help my dad, so I should get rid of them. But I get it, but no, that's not what you should be doing with your free time. She was a gifted inventor. She could have done something beneficial with her time and just let go of the past and kept moving forward. I can't believe I just quoted Meet the Robinsons there for a moment, but she didn't do something right. She was too stuck in the past, was too much of a child to admit she was wrong. At the end, she does state that just because the super saved her didn't mean that the supers were right. But yeah, she took the death of her dad a bit too hard, a little bit. I get grief is a bad thing and that people should grieve, but grieving and taking it too far, and grieving and acting on that grief to make malicious intentions isn't a good thing. For example, this is a similar situation with Superman from the Injustice series. He lost Lois because he was tricked by Joker, so he decided that the best thing to do would be to outlaw crime entirely and execute all criminals, which is not a good idea ever. I mean, yeah, if a guy's in jail, he probably deserves it because he probably did something bad to get there, or he was framed, which is a small case of people, but they eventually are readmitted back into society and are eventually forgiven for what they've done, and do eventually come to terms with it and are eventually let go because they've reformed as a person. So the whole thing about killing the criminals didn't really make a whole lot of sense in Superman's justification, because he thought he was doing something good for the world when in actuality he wasn't, because he was killing criminals who were probably on their way to redemption, and it did cause a bit of a problem in Injustice 2, as everybody saw because I played that on my channel. But the whole thing about grief and acting on it is a problem. This has gotten very matter of life-y a little bit, this review here, but it's a problem. If you're suffering with grief, then don't take it out on other people. Try to come to terms with it instead of trying to take it out on the people responsible. Just get some counseling or something if you have violent urges like that. If you're grieving and suddenly decide to take it out on somebody, maybe get some counseling for that, because it's not the person's fault. It's not a person's fault if somebody dies. Everybody dies. It's just the circumstances surrounding it that may cause people to justify attacking or even killing another one out of anger or spite or whatever. But yeah, I did enjoy the movie. I recommend it. It's still in theaters as I'm recording this. If you're watching it in like a month or two or even a year from now, then probably not in theaters anymore, if that's the case. But as of the day I'm recording this right now, as this has gone up, the day this has gone up, the movie is still in theaters, and I recommend going to watch it. If you're not watching it at the time this is recorded, then you should probably pick it up at your nearest Blu-ray store or whatever and watch it there. But either way, I hope you guys did enjoy this review. I definitely enjoyed making it, and I hope people go and see the film, because the film was great. I love the film. It was definitely a deserving sequel for a movie that hasn't been around in 14 years. Because this movie came out in 2004. The first movie came out in 2004, and it finally got a sequel today in 2018, which is a long time for a movie, yeah. And I'm just glad they finally made it after all this time. So yeah, if you guys do want to see this movie, go to the theater or pick it up, if depending, circumstances depending. And yeah, thank you guys so much for watching this review. If you liked it, hit that like and the subscribe button. Also be sure to follow me on Facebook and on Twitter in the description below. And until next time, I will see you guys in the next video.